when we bought this house, it was a fixer-upper, and throughout the years I have remodeled it and added new rooms. However, the front door has always been in the back of my mind to do. It's always something that you look at when you first come home and you think, man, I gotta do that. But then there's always another project that needs to happen. I finally got around to replacing the front door, mainly because it was having a hard time closing. Instead of doing it out of desire, I did it out of necessity. To be clear, I am not a professional, and doors have always given me a hard time, mainly because I have a hard time keeping them square and plumb. So first things first, we got to take off all the magnets that my kids have attached to it. Next, I simply took the trim around the door off, making sure to cut the paint along the edge of the trim so that I didn't pull up the paint as I was pulling off the trim. And then I just got a hand crowbar and just started prying up the trim. This house was built in the late 70s, and so it's always interesting when I'm pulling off the original of anything, trim or any type of hardware, because the nails and the fasteners that they use back then were significantly bigger than what they are now. So I often have to pull and tug a little bit more than normal. I did the same thing on the outside. I just took the brick molding off from the outside of the door. I was not careful. This was not going to be saved, so I just kind of ripped and pulled at it. Here you can see just how old and dingy the door is. There are what seem to be little divots in the door. I can only assume there was some trim or molding that framed out the door. I'm not entirely sure. I do know that it is an eyesore, and I am glad I don't have to look at it anymore. The trim color on this house originally was a dark brown. That added with the light brown of the brick just really gave it a dated and ugly feel, in my opinion. So throughout the years, I've been switching everything to white windows, white garage door, white siding, and I think it really livens up the building and makes it look a little more modern. Once I got the brick molding off, I just took the door frame out, really the same way that I did the molding on the inside and the outside. There were some pretty big nails that I had to pull out. I think they were 3-inch nails. But overall, very simple process. On the north side of the door, there was some rot down at the bottom. Also, the bottom plate, the subfloor right under the door, was super soft and rotting away. So I just simply ripped it up to see how bad the damage was. Luckily, it was only the subfloor, it was not the plywood underneath. That was still very strong. So I just took a piece of the subfloor. I went in my shop and found some scraps that I used the old piece to size it up, and then just cut down some scraps to the right size, and then I just put a couple nails in them to secure it down. After that, I followed the instructions that came with the door, and it said to put a lot of silicone on the bottom to keep moisture out. Not thinking, I did this before I dry fit the door, and this was a bad idea because I used up half of a bottle of silicone, and then I went to install the door, and of course it did not fit. There was some metal at the top of the door that was holding the rock on the outside of my house, and this came down a little too far on the top of the door, so I simply bent it up a little bit and tried to get it out of the way enough that the top of the door would clear. And this helped a little bit, but the main problem for the door not fitting was at the bottom. At the bottom, it seemed like they installed the door and then they poured the step right in front of the door, and the concrete molded to the door. Because of this, there was a little concrete lip right at the base of the door, and the new door was not able to go over that lip. To rectify this, I obviously had to wipe up all the silicone that I had put down, which, if you've never done that before, is not very fun. It does not like to come up. That stuff is designed to stay down, and it's not easy to clean up. So I did the best I could, and then I just came back with my angle grinder and just ground down the concrete as much as I could to get it as level as possible. I did make sure to wear a respirator, as this created a tremendous amount of dust. Once I was done with that, I decided I should probably dry fit it this time to see if any more modifications were needed. Luckily it did fit, so I went ahead and put some more silicone down and hammered the door in place. While it went in most of the way, there was still some problem, and it was the brick molding. As you can see here, this is another result of the door being in first and then having them put the rock around the door. The new brick molding went above the old, and so I had to remove the brick molding on the new door and then cut it down. I took it to the table saw and ripped it down and cut the sides, cut the top off of the two sides so it would slide in. Once that was done, I went back inside and shimmed up the door to make sure it was as square and plumb as possible. the trouble that I had with getting the door in and having it be super tight kind of came in handy when shimming it, because very little shims were needed. It just kind of fell right in place. I really just put shims around the hinges and the door latch to make sure that those portions were nice and secure. I put screws through the shims on the hinges to make sure that there was no gaps between the door jamb and the 2x4. However, whenever installing a door, the process of making sure the door can close and open is just opening and closing it about 100 times. And so I just did that. I went back and forth and adjusted the shims as needed. Once I got them to the place that I was comfortable with, I went back and I drilled some pilot holes and then sunk some 3-inch screws. To try and hide the screws as best as possible, I moved the weather stripping to the side and I put the screws underneath the weather stripping. I did this on both sides while also grabbing the level and frequently checking if the door was square and plumb. Once the door was screwed in, I went back and put the brick molding on the outside. I had to cut the tops of the sides and also the bottom because, like I've said before, they poured the concrete step after they put the door in, and the brick molding on the old door actually went down below the top of the concrete step and was cemented in there. The next day I came back, wiped the door down for any dust and debris, and then put on 3 coats of exterior door paint. In retrospect, I probably should have sprayed this on. I thought using the brush would be sufficient. However, you can clearly see the brush strokes, and I am not that thrilled with the finish. However, I'm too lazy to sand it all down and to spray it. After painting it, it was time to put the inside trim on. I cut out the baseboard because I was using a thicker trim than was previously on the door. The old door jamb was actually thicker than the new door jamb, and so even though the front of the door, the outside of the door, was flush, the brick mold went on just like it's supposed to, and it looked great from the outside. The inside, the door jamb was only thick enough for the 2x4s, and the outside rock facing. This took a significant amount of scratching my head to try and figure out the best way to solve it. Fortunately, I went back to the shop and I found some melamine that was already white, and I figured I could cut those to strips and put them in between the door jamb and the trim, and it worked beautifully without actually knowing that the door jamb isn't as thick as it needed to be. I think it's hardly noticeable that there is a piece of melamine in between the two. Not to mention, who looks at the door jambs of their front door? This was a much needed upgrade. I always knew that a front door can really change the look of a home from the outside as well as the inside. The door opens and closes smoothly. There are no problems with it sticking, and it only took a couple days. It is something that could probably be done in a weekend. It took me a couple weeks because I took my time and because I put a lot of paint on the door. I put 3 coats on both sides. I would love to know what you guys think. Please leave a comment. Make sure to like and subscribe. And thank you for watching.